The prisoner manifest lists her as condemned Unit 7. That's the first thing I notice. Not the chains, not the caste mark burned into her collarbone, not the 4 Vithali transfer officers who don't speak to her or look at her the entire walk from the docking arm to the holding block. The first thing I notice is the designation. Unit 7, not a name, not even a number with a species prefix, a unit. I'm the overnight security contractor on Reth 4, which means I sit at a desk in a decommissioned customs platform at the edge of the Varath corridor, and I watch 3 holding cells and a corridor that sees maybe 1 transfer per month. The platform went civilian contract 8 years ago, when the IWC stopped funding outer lane military posts. I'm the only human on the station. The Vithali use it as a waypoint because the docking fees are cheap and the paperwork is minimal and nobody asks questions about what they're moving through. I've processed 41 transfers in 2 years. I know what they look like. The prisoner walks in at the center of the escort formation, cuffed at the wrists with transit restraints, mag-locked to a floor anchor on the cell's back wall. The officers file the hold authorization, take their copy of the receipt, and leave. The prisoner sits in the dark. I open the cell in the morning for the handoff team, and I don't look at what I'm handing off, because it's not my job, and it's not my problem, and the outer lanes are full of people doing exactly that calculation every day. That's how 40 of the 41 transfers have gone. She walks into the holding block and I stand up from my desk without meaning to. She's tall, taller than the officers flanking her, and they're tall by most standards. Ash-gray skin, the color of old concrete in low light. Her hair is dark, the shade of deep water, and it falls loose because no one bothered to bind it. And there's something in that, in the small indignity of that registers before anything else does. She isn't struggling, she isn't crying. She walks with her chin level and her eyes straight ahead, and she carries herself like a woman who has already decided that what is happening to her does not define what she is. The caste mark on her collarbone is sovereignty issue, a chemical burn in the shape of the condemnation seal. I've seen it on 3 other prisoners in 2 years. It means her own government sentenced her. It means whatever she did it against the Vithali sovereignty, not against us. The officers never explain those cases, and I've never asked, because it's not my job. Tonight I ask. What's the charge? I say to the lead officer, as he hands me the hold authorization chip. He looks at me the way Vithali officials always look at humans. Not with contempt exactly, but with the specific expression of someone who has encountered a piece of furniture that has unexpectedly spoken. Conduct contravening sovereignty directive, refusal to authorize a cleanse order. She is condemned pending formal sentencing aboard the Vithali adjudication vessel, Sorek's Claim, which arrives at this station at 0600. I look at the chip. I look at her. She is standing in the center of the cell, wrists still locked, and she is looking at the wall, and she has not looked at me once. And I think about that for a moment, about what it must mean to have learned, in whatever process led to this night, that looking at the person who holds your paperwork is not something that ends well. Cleanse order, I say. Standard planetary sanitation protocol. The prisoner refused to authorize it. He says it the way you'd say she refused to sign a requisition form. She is Empress caste and held executive authority over Directive 7 Non. She declined to execute. The sovereignty considers that an act of insurrection. He takes his copy of the receipt, clips it to his uniform, and walks out with the 3 other officers without another word. The holding block door seals behind them. I stand at my desk for a long moment. She is still looking at the wall. I get up, and I go to the supply cabinet, and I take out one of the water rations we keep for the cells, and I walk to the holding block door, and I key it open, and I walk in. The maglock on her wrist restraints runs to a floor anchor in the back wall, and gives her about 4 feet of movement. I stop outside that radius, and I hold out the water ration. She looks at me. Her eyes are silver, not pale gray. Silver, like the back of a mirror, with depth behind them. She looks at me, and the wariness in those eyes is absolute and complete, and not the wariness of fear. It's the wariness of a person who has processed a long series of events and arrived at an accurate understanding of how they end. I set the water ration on the floor inside her reach, and I step back to the door. My name is Cole Danner, I say. I'm the overnight security contractor. The transfer team picks you up at 0600. I pause. The manifest lists you as condemned Unit 7. That's not a name. What's your name? She looks at the water ration. She looks at me. The silence runs for 10 full seconds, and I let it run. Because I'm not in a hurry, and the question will still be true whenever she decides to answer it. Sareth, she says. Her voice is low and very even, like someone who has been speaking in controlled registers for so long it has become the only register she has. Of the Vethali Sovereignty, former Executive Authority, 7th Directorate, a beat, former. Sareth, I say. I make sure I say it the way she said it, with the weight on the second syllable. I'm going to leave the door cracked. If you need anything, call out. I go back to my desk. I don't sleep. I pull up the open access IWC registry, and I read for 2 hours. Directive 7 Non was issued 14 months ago against a species the Vethali Sovereignty classifies as non-sapient. The species has 17 documented language structures, cooperative nest building, consistent with second-tier cognitive assessment, and a population of approximately 400 million on a moon inside sovereignty territory. Sareth refused to sign the execution order. I sit with that for a while. At 0200 I get up and I go back to the holding block. The door is cracked the way I left it. She is sitting against the back wall, wrists resting on her knees, and she watches me walk in without moving. I pull the chair from the processing alcove, and I set it just inside the radius of her restraint chain, and I sit down. 400 million, I say. She looks at me steadily. 412 million. At the most recent census, the sovereignty's assessment excluded the Eastern Hemisphere's population as subcognitive. The assessment was conducted by the same directorate that issued the cleanse order. You had the authority to stop it. I exercised the authority to stop it. The sovereignty subsequently determined that my exercise of that authority constituted insurrection and retroactively revoked my executive standing. She says it cleanly, without bitterness, with the precision of someone who has recited the sequence enough times that the feeling has been worn smooth by repetition. The directive was executed through the deputy authorization chain 11 days after my detention. The moon's population was reduced by 87% before IWC monitoring stations flagged the event. I look at her for a long moment. Then you did the right thing, I say. And it didn't work, and now they're transferring you to a sentencing vessel. Yes. And the 0600 transfer team is going to put you on the Sorex claim, and the Sorex claim is going to go to wherever sovereignty sentencing vessels go. The Vethali adjudication station at Korath Deep. Yes. The silver eyes don't waver. You've been reading the registry. 2 hours of it. Something shifts in her face. It's small, the faintest compression at the corners of her mouth, something that is not quite a smile and not quite grief. Why? I think about that. Because the manifest called you Unit 7, I say, and that bothered me. The silence between us is different now. Earlier it was wariness. This is something else. She is looking at me the way you look at something that does not fit the pattern you've been given, and she's recalculating, and I can see her doing it. You're a security contractor, she says. Retired combat medic. I took the contract because the outer lanes pay better than the inner stations, and I wanted quiet. I lean back in the chair. Didn't get much quiet tonight. No, she says, and this time the corners of her mouth do move. It's small. It's there. I look at the restraint chain. I look at the floor anchor. I look at the transit seal on the cell's outer frame, the Vethali diplomatic seal that makes this cell sovereignty jurisdiction. IWC Standard Protocol on Contested Jurisdiction Transfers gives the holding platform's senior authorized officer a window to file an emergency witness declaration, a provision for cases where the transfer may constitute an act against a recognized non-combatant. I used it once on a deployment. I looked it up 2 hours ago. The provision gives me 48 hours of automatic hold pending IWC review. I won't be a contractor on Reth 4 after I file it. The Vethali will pull their docking arrangement, the platform's revenue goes to zero, and my contract terminates by noon. But the sovereignty adjudication vessel Sorik's claim arrives at 0600, and if Sarath is on it when it undocks, she goes to Korath Deep. Whatever happens at Korath Deep to people who refuse planetary cleanse orders, it doesn't have an IWC observer on it. I know what I'm going to do. I've known since I read the registry entry at 045. I've been sitting in this chair because I wanted to look at her face when I told her. The sovereignty seal on your cell makes this sovereignty jurisdiction, I say, but the transit seal has to be renewed every 4 hours, while the platform is under contracted IWC oversight. The last renewal was at 2200, which means the seal lapsed at 0200. I glance at the time display on my wrist. 11 minutes ago. She is very still. While the seal is lapsed, this cell falls under platform jurisdiction. That's me. I reach into my jacket pocket, and I take out the manual override key that every holding block contractor carries for emergency cell access. The floor anchor is a Vithali fitting, but the cuffs are IWC standard transit restraints, because the sovereignty uses this platform, and the platform's custody hardware is IWC spec. I hold up the key. I have the override. She looks at the key, she looks at me. The silver eyes are very wide now, and there is something in them that is not wariness, and not the controlled flatness of the last several hours, something that has not quite dared to exist yet. If you do this, she says carefully, you lose this post. Yes. The sovereignty will file a diplomatic incident report. Probably. There is no guarantee the IWC emergency witness declaration will hold. No. But it'll hold long enough for you to be somewhere the Sorik's claim isn't. I stand up from the chair. I'm going to file the declaration first. Then I'm going to open the cuffs. Then I'm going to walk you to the secondary docking arm, where there is a civilian freight runner registered to a Pelthis-based carrier that departs at 0330. I know the pilot. She owes me a favor that I have never collected. I watch her process this. I watch her decide whether it's real. I watch the moment she decides it is. I file the declaration. It takes 4 minutes. The system acknowledges receipt, and the 48-hour hold activates, and somewhere on the Sorik's claim, a notification is generating that will make the next several hours complicated for everyone involved. I put the filing chip in my pocket. I walk to her. I crouch down and I fit the override key to the first cuff and it opens, and then the second, and the floor anchor releases, and she stands up to her full height in the center of the cell, and she rolls her wrists once, slowly, and she looks at me from that height, and I look back at her, and neither of us says anything for a moment. The secondary docking arm, I say. This way. We walk the corridor. The platform is quiet at 0200, one other contractor on the far side of the station. A rotation I know doesn't bring him through this section for another hour. Sarath walks beside me, not behind me, and I don't ask her to walk behind me, because there's no reason she should. Her footsteps are nearly silent on the deck plating. Mine are not. The secondary docking arm is a short corridor ending in a pressure door. The freight runner is berthed on the other side, and through the small porthole, I can see its running lights on standby cycle. I key the corridor access and the pressure door unseals. She stops. I stop with her. She turns and looks at me, and the silver eyes are doing something I haven't seen from her all night, something unguarded, something that has dropped the controlled register and the measured precision, something that is just a person, standing in a corridor at 2 in the morning, looking at another person who did something she did not expect from anyone, in a sequence of events that did not give her much reason to expect it. She says something in Vithali, low, 3 syllables. She says it once, clearly, and she holds my eyes when she says it. I don't speak Vithali. I tell her so. I know, she says. It doesn't require translation. She looks at me for one more moment, long enough that I'll remember exactly what it looks like, and then she turns and walks through the pressure door toward the freight runner's berth, and the door seals behind her, and the corridor is quiet. I stand there for a few seconds. Then I go back to my desk, and I sit down, and I wait for 0600, and the Sorik's claim, and whatever comes after. It doesn't scare me. I looked at her face when I told her. That's the part I'll keep.